another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Barbara, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the February 15th issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Art. Helping artists find a footing in pricey cities. Gentrification closes doors to creative types vital to urban areas. A novel approach in San Francisco seeks to break the cycle, by Zachary Small. San Francisco. The small house on Russell Street where Jack Kerouac worked on the Road in the 1950s now has an estimated value of more than $1.7 million, far beyond what any respectable beat poet could have paid for 2 bedrooms in San Francisco. Not far away, Janis Joplin's 1-bedroom pad in Haight-Ashbury would rent for some 20 times what it most likely went for in the late 1960s, according to property records. And this studio where the photographer Dorothea Lange worked near Union Square in San Francisco now has a price tag higher than what most artists these days can afford. In 2017, the space sold for nearly $2.7 million. If these artists were around today, it's unlikely that they would recognize the neighborhoods they helped to define. In the years since the tech industry moved into the area, the demand for property has soared. The artists who turned downtrodden streets into desirable enclaves have been priced out of their neighborhoods. But to produce their best work, many artists depend on cities as arenas of creative cross-pollination. And cities, it turns out, need artists who give them cultural cachet, heighten the quality of living on offer, and promote economic growth. So, in a region where many young artists struggle to afford rent, much less purchase property, nonprofit leaders have pursued a potentially transformative idea. What if they could curb gentrification by subverting the traditional rhythms of the real estate industry? Trading financial gain for lasting impact. Several older artists have donated the houses they bought decades ago to community land trusts, legal entities that can break the cycle of displacement by ensuing properties are handed down from one artist to another at affordable prices. Last year, for instance, a 79-year-old artist in Oakland, California, bequeathed the bungalow she purchased in 1978 for $22,700 to a program called Artist Space Trust, run by the nonprofits Northern California Land Trust and Visual Arts. When the artist dies or moves out, the home, which is now estimated to be worth more than $1 million, will be converted into a so-called split title, allowing the trust to hold on to the underlying land as it sells the house to another artist at a bargain price. Artist Space Trust will put the proceeds from the sale toward buying additional properties. These properties are permanently removed from the speculative market for real estate and will never return, said Meg Schiffler, the director of Artist Space Trust, which was founded in 2023. When one of our homeowners decides to leave, The property returns to the trust, and through a selection process, we can place another artist or family. Similar programs are unfolding across the Bay Area, and not only for housing. The Community Arts Stabilization Trust, for instance, is purchasing buildings abandoned by tech companies during the coronavirus pandemic and, following the land trust model, is converting them into low-rent workspaces for arts groups. This is about the economic success of San Francisco, says Schiffler, who worked at the city's Arts Commission for 16 years. Because if all of our artists leave, then we lose our cultural identity. A devastating pattern. Cities have inspired artists for centuries and gained a place in history because of them. There would be no Impressionism without the renegade salons of Paris in the late 1800s. No modernist literature without the gatherings of Bloomsbury Group authors like Virginia Woolf in their London homes in the early 1900s. And no Harlem Renaissance without the migration of Black artists and intellectuals to the upper Manhattan neighborhood in the 1920s. In the 1960s, it was Soho, the formerly industrial neighborhood south of Houston Street, where artists illegally squatted in lofts, which had been vacated by factories, leaving Manhattan to be closer to modern ports. The loft's high ceilings and reinforced floors suited early residents like the video artist Nam June Paik and the painter Chuck Close, whose works could reach monumental scales. The artists could pay meager rents between $50 and $125 a month to the landlords who otherwise had empty buildings. They beautified their spaces. Many outfitted them with basic plumbing and lighting. Major art dealers, including Leo Castelli, Ileana Sonnabend, and John Weber, set up shop around the corner at 420 West Broadway. Economic revival historically starts with artists, said Raphael Mandelman, the president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. The challenge is that if they are successful, it leads to increases in cost and prices for the people who made that happen. In Soho, artists began to push officials to legalize lofts, and in 1982, New York State enacted its loft law, which provided rent stabilization to existing tenants and guidelines to landlords for bringing the retrofitted apartments up to code. It was only amid the fallout of the loft law, after landlords had passed renovation costs on to tenants or bought out their leases, that many artists realized they had been priced out of Soho. A month's rent for a 1,500 square foot loft in the neighborhood had shot up to between $1,000 and $2,500, some 25 times what the artists were paying in the 1960s. Only a small number of long-term residents were able to keep their spots. The Soho Grand Hotel opened. Prada moved in. The story of Soho's brief success is that it functioned well as an artist's colony because of how the illegality repressed the functioning of the commercial market, said Aaron Sakuda, a Princeton University professor who wrote a book on the gentrification of Soho. The pattern has repeated itself in other New York areas. A recent report from the Center for an Urban Future, a public policy research group, found that since 2019, Harlem has lost 17% of its artists. The Upper West Side has lost nearly 32%, and the Lower East Side has lost more than 55%. Scholars have identified similar trends taking hold in cities like Chicago, Portland, Oregon, and to be sure, San Francisco. The benefit of regulated and permanently affordable artist housing, Mandelman said, is that it will not be subject to these vicissitudes. A unique moment. What is happening in San Francisco suggests that artists have learned from the history of gentrification, and many of the nonprofit organizations helping artists acquire properties through land trusts or below-market deals have plans to expand nationwide. This is a unique moment where we could be the most active player in the real estate market, Ken Akita, the chief executive of the Community Arts Stabilization Trust, said recently as he walked through a downtown building on Market Street. The building, which the nonprofit has purchased for $7.3 million, was in the middle of a renovation and retained touches from when the tech startup Zendesk and other firms occupied it. Conference rooms with names like Curly Fries and Shark Tooth look down on 6th Street, one of the city's most troubled corridors, marked by overdose treatment centers, homeless encampments, and frequently armed police officers. If everything goes as planned, the arts organizations set to work in the building will help revitalize Market Street and then benefit from the downtown resurgence without fear of skyrocketing rents. The Community Arts Stabilization Trust will see the value of its portfolio increase and continue to develop affordable spaces for arts groups. The trust has already announced that its anchor tenant, KALW, a public radio station, will occupy the top 2 floors of the Market Street building. It has made deals on other properties in the neighborhood for an art gallery and a performance space. Akita said the model that the nonprofit was establishing in San Francisco was being replicated in cities like Denver, Minneapolis, Tacoma, Washington, and Austin, Texas. Recently, the trust extended its work to property and asset management for affordable artist housing in Colorado. We have to look at artists as economic contributors, Akita said, because it's been an uphill battle for us to shift the cultural perspective around how arts and value to a city, how arts add value to a city. Studies commissioned by nonprofit organizations, including the National League of Cities, have repeatedly shown that the arts meaningfully contribute to tax revenue and provide employment to hundreds of thousands of workers in cities like Los Angeles, New York, and San Francisco. A recent study by the National Endowment for the Arts found that between 2022 and 2023, the cultural sector in the United States grew at more than twice the rate of the total economy. Cities with vibrant arts scenes often earn a prestige that attracts visitors, who in turn bring economic rewards. More obvious, perhaps, are the benefits that cities offer artists. A concentration of wealth can mean a prospective art buyer is around the corner. A museum down the back block can provide inspiration, and a nearby art supply store can hold the resources needed to make the work. Schiffler, the director of Artist Space Trust, said change in San Francisco was mostly coming from older artists who wanted to help their younger counterparts. They recognized that low mortgage payments had given them a sense of security that allowed them to take vital creative risks. And the moment has felt even more urgent as the city loses its private art schools. In January, the last one standing, the California College of the Arts, announced that it was closing. Artist Space Trust portfolio includes a duplex valued at $2.6 million. The 2 units will be sold for a total of less than $1 million, and the trust will offer buyers nearby a third of the price in down payment assistance. None of our donor artists have stopped working. Many are low income themselves, Schiffler said, but they know the only reason they could stay in the Bay Area was housing security, and they want that for future generations too. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Critical but dazzling too. Nick Cave's Mammoth takes on Race and Climate Change by Blake Gopnik. Washington. A 70-foot table stretches almost the length of the gallery. It comes scattered with more than 300 translucent trivets beaded in light bright colors. 193 faux fruits and vegetables bejeweled. 109 wooden canes of every kind. 40 badminton rackets. 21 glass fish, and 18 leather slippers sheathed in sequins and buttons. It would be easy to imagine that Mammoth, the new installation that opened Friday at the Smithsonian American Art Museum here, was the scattershot product of some pack rat outsider. You would think I'm a hoarder, agrees Nick Cave, who created the work, but I'm by no means interested in that at all. My personal space is very minimal. On the frigid Saturday in January that we met in Washington, Cave certainly doesn't look like an anarchic outsider. About to turn 67, he keeps his gray hair and beard trimmed close. He's dressed in tidy black sportswear, like a professor caught at home on a winter weekend. Cave has taught for decades at the School of Art Institute in Chicago. His red and white high tops show a sophisticated grasp of pop culture. They're by the Japanese brand Bathing Ape, marrying Tokyo street style to hip-hop cred. Jay-Z and Kanye West have been fans. In the art world, Cave is a distinct insider. His wearable sculptures, called sound suits, have been in group shows around the globe. He's had surveys at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, Boston's Institute of Contemporary Art, and the Denver Art Museum. The inspiration for Cave's latest project arose from a deep dive into history. I come from a family of makers, musicians, poets, singers, craftsmen, woodworkers, quilters, he says, and that was something that I wanted to focus on. Memories of summers spent on his grandparents' farm in Missouri were especially important, as were the crafts that delighted his grandmother and her sisters and nieces, faux fruits and beaded trivets, among others. For Sarah Newman, Sam's curator of contemporary art, Cave's excavation of his past is vital to Mammoth. It's about memory and creativity and the process of memory and how memory affects our lives, she said, as we look in Cave's work. as we took in Cave's work. But sometimes old memories, however personal, can have wider and quite current implications. Couched in Cave's dazzle in the new show is a pervasive fear, according to Newman, without ever surfacing directly, as she puts it in her catalog essay. She writes about Mammoth as speaking to the current ecological crisis as part of a broader reckoning with how we engage with the land and our shared history. She describes Cave's sound suits as having equally political meaning. Born in response to the 1991 beating of Rodney King, they explore Cave's vulnerability as a black man in America. Newman writes, which is then echoed in the current show, she says. In another essay, the art historian Cherise Smith bills Mammoth as the kind of industrial critique that shines a light on our museum industrial complex. The jumbled objects in Mammoth, she says, point to and thwart the ordering of museums' collections, in turn indicating and circumventing the attendant classification to which museums subject people. The platform that holds Cave's scatter of objects is, in fact, topped in white plastic that's brightly lit from below, like the light table on an anthropologist, a Smithsonian anthropologist, might use to study such artifacts. And Sam has the courage to entertain such critique, however cloaked in Cave's bounty, at a time when its parent institution is more than ever under the Trump administration's anti-woke microscope. For months, the Smithsonian has been grappling with White House demands to surrender records and wall texts from its museums to be vetted for improper ideology. How might the president feel about a Smithsonian exhibition by a black gay artist contending with issues of race, identity, and the changing climate, as Newman has described Mammoth, when his administration has begun removing mention of climate change from our national parks, when talk of slavery has vanished from a Parks Service display on George Washington, our founding president and owner of enslaved people? Cave himself imagined that his art might face pushback in Trump's Washington. I thought about it for a minute, he told me, but then I'm like, I've got to proceed forward. That will come, if it comes, and I will address it then. In an emailed statement responding to my questions, Sam wrote that there has been no outside influence on Mammoth. The exhibition is being presented as it was conceived by the artist in concert with Sam's cultural team. But his project in the wall texts that I was later sent makes no mention of the issues of climate change, race, or critique that are highlighted in the catalog. Speaking in person, Newman shies away from any combative take on Cave's project. I'm trying not to think about it in terms of the larger politics, she says, because I just don't think that is what Nick is thinking about. But whether that's true or not, Cave tells me proudly of his presence at a No Kings March. His art certainly seems able to spark political thoughts in her and in us. As a critic, I admit to having been more worried over the years that the shiny objects in Cave's art might be as likely to distract from tough thought as to provoke it. But Mammoth has a darkness that gives it heft. The most striking thing about Cave's table is the chaos of its objects, not organized to tell a story, maybe, about some golden farm moments, but disorganized to resist all orderly storytelling. Cave's account of his project has some of the same discombobulation. Thoughts pile up inside sentences, then go off in every direction, like cars at a traffic circle. I don't know anything. I don't think, or do I? I don't know anything, and yet I know it, he tells me. Such talk evokes one of Samuel Beckett's Cold War plays, or maybe the modernist prose that emerged after World War I, which could help explain Cave's artwork as well. You might call it stream of consciousness sculpture. More committed to modern art's classic breakdown of sense, often in response to crises even worse than our own, than to calling things cleanly to mind. One of several tall sculptures that rise up from Cave's table is a bicycle frame married to an old telephone, married to a pair of glove molds, married to a TV antenna. It conjures the data accumulations of the Baroness Elsa von Freytag-Loringhoven, a Jazz Age artist who witnessed doughboys coming home mangled, or the self-destructive machines that Jean Tiguli cobbled together as the new atomic bombs threatened. And then there's the giant mural titled Palimpsest, Promised Land, that fills the vast wall beside Cave's table. It was executed by the designer Bob Faust, Cave's life partner, and its imagery, Cave says, derives from the childhood farm in Missouri, particularly the acres of land that I was able to have access to as a young kid. Except that hardly a bit of that will be visible in Cave's show. On the day Cave and I met Faust, a slim white man in a laborer's gray overalls, was adding final touches to a dense web of pony beads, shoestrings, netting, and colored rods that hid the mural his partner had asked him to make. That weird, unexplained cancellation has a poignancy that suffuses Mammoth, despite its surface sparkle. The show's title, Cave tells me, began as nothing more than an adjective describing the scale and scope of his project. But then he thought about the vanished beasts the word points to as a noun and decided to add those tragic creatures to the mix. Above his vast table at Sam loom 5 lifeguard chairs, each topped by a crazy tusked sculpture that recalls a mammoth's head, as though the planet's past is watching us threaten its present. Deploying one of his classic oxymorons, Cave talks about his chair mammoths as both surveilling us and alarming, signaling us. In a gallery off to one side, he's bringing the lost creatures to life. Projectors will fill the walls with disjointed footage of vast mammoth puppets making their woolly way through our world. On October 24th, performers will animate those mammoths once again in a procession through Sam. The show will run through January 3rd. There's a chance, Cave says, that if our moment's cultural politics do intrude on his show, the darkness of those mammoths might spread beyond them. If there was any tampering with my exhibition, I would love to come and spray paint everything black, like dressing his project in mourning, he says. All the objects on the table, everything, would be just sprayed black. So that may have to happen yet, and I'm all about it. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. She stood out and then bowed out. Libby Howes showed promise on stage but became a mystery, by Helen Shaw. In 1975, Anne Elizabeth Howes, a young actress from Birmingham, Michigan, who went by Libby, landed in New York City. The city wasn't at its most hospitable that summer. City Hall teetered on the brink of bankruptcy, and in July, the sanitation department briefly stopped picking up the garbage. But Howes was a pilgrim, dedicated to new forms of performance, so she came east to intern with a collective of avant-garde artists that included the actor Spalding Gray. By October, the 20-year-old Howes was performing in Saconet Point, 1975, the first piece in the Three Places in Rhode Island trilogy made by what would eventually be called the Wooster Group. Howes would appear in all of these productions, a set of hallucinatory evocations of Gray's past, including Nyack School, 1978, and an epilogue, Point Judith, 1979. But she especially shone in Rumstick Road, the second piece of the Gray triptych. Rumstick Road from 1977 is a part documentary, part vaudeville, part nightmare in which Gray recounts the mental deterioration and eventual suicide in 1967 of his mother, Bet. Actors lip-synced to recordings of his family members, or ran around like kids. A cool-voiced Gray showed slides of his childhood home, where his mother lost her mind. Howes, an instinctive dancer and imposing presence on stage, played an archetypical woman figure. She was simultaneously Bet and non-Bet, and the Bet that no one knew. I was born around the time Rumpstick Road went into rehearsals, so I encountered it 35 years later in a so-called video reconstruction, a complex assemblage of footage from various performers, reel-to-reel audio tape, and even photographs. The director, Elizabeth LeCompte, and the filmmaker, Ken Coblin, first showed this gorgeous film compilation in 2012. I saw that screening, and it remains one of the most extraordinarily theatrical performances I've ever seen, live or recorded. An exhilaration, a contagious energy somehow breaks through the patchwork of bleary Kodachrome. In one astonishing sequence, Howes performs what LeCompte called the house dance, the obsessive repetition of a single head-banging movement set to a stormy Bach partita for solo violin. The actress looks like a figure out of a Gothic horror. She wears a black, long Victorian dress, and as she bends again and again, her waist-length hair whips back and forth like a cat of nine tails. This percussive rocking goes on for 10 minutes. I remember thinking, this is dangerous. Rumstick Road was a legacy-building triumph for the Woosters, which just celebrated 50 years of making genre-dissolving work under Lecomte's direction. They are the first of the great multimedia collages. Pieces seem to switch channels among dance, panel discussion, explicit B-movies, deconstructed theatrical texts, and presented with equal dispassion their own lives. In the 2025 book, American Performance in 1976, the scholar Mark Robinson names the first public rehearsal of Rumstick Road as one of 5 landmarks that established an American avant-garde. Watching the film, it's clear that Howes, so often noted by critics for her beauty and ardency, was a major reason why. But the reconstruction can also be painful to watch for those who know what came after. In Rumstick Road, for example, we hear Bet's psychiatrist telling a bewildered Spaulding not to be frightened of depression's hereditary predispositions. We know that in 2004, Spaulding will die by suicide. Ron Vater, who played Spaulding's father, died in 1994, his heart weakened by AIDS. Howes had a psychotic break in 1981 and disappeared. For decades, Howes' location has been a mystery. She has been a unique absence, unquiet, one of the ghosts in the avant-garde's machine. A family of intellectuals. Libby Howes was the youngest of 4 tall girls. She and her older sisters, Candace, Priscilla, and Margaret, often called Peg, were all born in Hartford, Connecticut, but were raised in Michigan after their mechanical engineer father got a job at Ford. They came from a family of Boston intellectuals. Libby's paternal grandmother was the suffragist and psychologist Ethel Puffer Howes, who completed a full slate of doctoral work at Harvard in 1898. At 65 years before the psychology department awarded its first PhD to a woman. When Libby came to New York, she was only partway through her degree at the University of Michigan. In 1974, a workshop at the college had brought her into the intoxicating orbit of the Performance Group, a seminal ensemble whose Bacchanalian work explored the ritual aspects of theater. One show, Close, in 1979, consisted of persuading the audience to strip. Oscar Eustis, now the artistic director of the Public Theater, remembers meeting Howes at a theater festival in Ann Arbor in May 1975. She had already secured her performance group internship. He was a 16-year-old runaway hitchhiking around looking at experimental theaters. After following her Pied Pipers to Soho, Howes bunked on the second floor of the performing garage, the group's home, in a converted metal stamping plant on Wooster Street. When Eustis arrived in New York that fall, he stayed with her. The way these things happen, we became a couple almost immediately, he told me, and they were together for about a year. Eustis said the two of them were there, interns quietly repainting the garage during a fateful meeting when the group's leader, Richard Schechner, stormed out, incensed by his insurgent proteges, Lecomte and Gray. They would go on to take over the space and rename the ensemble. Eustace remembered the Rumstick Road performance as a turning point. It was not something I'd ever seen from the group under Schechner, Eustace said. And Spaulding was amazing, but Spaulding was doing the New England cool. It was Howe's house dance that was the beginning. Eustace said of what the Wooster Group has been doing ever since, which is, yes, it's postmodern cool, but it's also fierce, intense, and personal. Wooster Group productions have also been services for the dead. Films and tapes keep long-gone voices present, and props, a red tent, for instance, which Bet takes refuge in at the end of Rumstick, are reused through decades of shows. These objects acquire a kind of talismanic heat. They broke taboo after taboo. Howe's appears in a sequence used in Route 1 and 9, the last act from 1981, a 2-minute clip of a black and white pornographic film of her and the group's rising star, Willem Dafoe. Candace was horrified when Howe's screened the whole thing for her. I felt something was unraveling, she said. By that time, Gray was shifting focus both to his Hollywood career and to his own hugely influential solo monologue pieces. Through the 1970s and early 80s, Howes worked mainly on Wooster productions. She also started creating her own work, like the immersive XXX Standing Room Only. But by the spring of 1981, Howe's accelerated mental dislocation became impossible to ignore. Kate Valk, now the Grande Dame and co-artistic director with Lecomte at the Wooster Group, has spoken about the time that Howes, who periodically slept under the risers in the garage's theater space, began to perceive mystic correspondences between the arrivals at a train station and a mysterious figure, perhaps one of the homeless men she had been inviting inside, she believed was arriving soon. At the time, Valk was a young intern and had been entranced by Howe's physicality, the equal of the men, she said. But language for Howe's had gone fluid and magical, and her body strength couldn't resist these new mental tides. Candace heard from Howe's boyfriend, the poet Bob Hallman, that she was coming apart, and I said, well, what's the evidence? And he said, she tried to get on a plane to Amsterdam without a ticket. Candace arranged for Howes to be admitted to Bellevue Hospital, and Peg transported her along with Valk and a few others. It took hours to persuade her to sign herself in. Valk told stories about Howes in the group's most recent work, Nayat School Redo 2025, which, like its 70s antecedent, takes its charge from the performer's own memory of a story larger than herself. I asked Valk how retelling this part of Howe's undoing affected her. Did it alter her appreciation of the past? Everybody was looking for liberatory practices, Valk said, and sometimes that looked like madness, and sometimes it was madness. Still, she doesn't see suffering when she watches those old performances, or danger. To me, I see, with both Spaulding and Libby, that the work gave them a place to live. Howe's parents took her back to Michigan, where she finished her college degree. After a few years, though, she abandoned treatment for her schizophrenia. She became belligerent and chaotic, and at one terrible Christmas gathering, her mother had the police remove her from the house. Her parents relocated to the East Coast, and Howe's, in an oblique way, followed. First, she returned to New York, living for a time under the West Side Highway, and then she continued moving, migrating to Keene, New Hampshire, where her family had a summer house. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Howe seemed to have been lost to many who had known her. Eventually, she refused to use a phone, and so she became harder and harder to reach. Life in Vermont. Many people, though, actually knew right where Libby was. In the 1990s, she moved to Brattleboro, Vermont, with a population of about 12,000. The town is uniquely welcoming to those like Howe's. She lived a life on her own idiosyncratic terms. There that seems nearly impossible anywhere else. After her mother died, she inherited a small legacy, which allowed her to buy a house located, fortunately enough, next to a supportive shelter called Groundworks Collaborative. With a little bit of state assistance and a trickle of money from the trust, she managed to tread very lightly on the earth. She became a constituent and then a helper at various places that fed the homeless. One of her best friends, Curtis Carroll, who went on long hikes with her, said she was amazing, but when her language went beyond short exchanges, it really didn't make a lot of sense. He seemed unruffled when she would insist that her sisters were imposters. At one point, she quarreled with Carroll because his license plate started with AEH. The letters were her initials. And so she felt like I was stealing her soul, Carroll said. She secretly repainted his plate. Carroll only realized what she'd done when he came out of a shop to find his car surrounded by the police. In the last decade, her moods mellowed a little, and her array of self-made finery and delight in speaking with her neighbors made her a much-loved local figure. She was more than willing to talk to anybody, Carroll said. There are lonely people out there everywhere, but she was interested in them, and they were interested in her. When Howe's died on December 17th, 2025, though, she still maintained a certain mystery. She was Libby, not Libby, and the Libby no one knew. For instance, one of Howe's sisters, Candace, found herself talking to the man who was set to carve Howe's headstone. They had been discussing Libby for a while before, in the course of conversation, she pointed across the street to her sister's yard. The man gasped, "You mean Anne? Anne died?" In 70 years, Candace had never known anyone to call her Anne. I talked to the Reverend Dr. Scott Cooper, the pastor of Center Congregational Church, which hosted her memorial. "We had probably over 100 there," he said. "I'm not sure if that many people would come if I died." Her life had been richer than ever her family and friends had known. Peg met a woman who told her Howe's had participated in the Southern Vermont Dance Festival for years. Candace learned she had been singing with an organist every day. Her conventional life really came to an end when she was only 26, said Peg. It was really comforting to know she was not isolated. She was not alone. A passionate environmentalist, Howes lived without heat and running water for decades. Carol described her house as a kind of wilderness. The house was so porous, windows were broken, doors wouldn't shut. The animals started to walk through, Carol said. She was delighted with that. A fire partially destroyed the house in April of 2025, at which point she moved into a tent in her front yard. She told Candace that she absolutely loved it. Everyone begged her to come inside when it got perilously cold, but she wouldn't. The words "fiercely independent," said Dr. Cooper, sometimes conceal how much frustration that fiercely could inflict on those who want to help. She did, at the end, come inside when cancer took her very quickly. She made one of her only phone calls from her hospital bed to thank Carol for his friendship. After Howe's death, the Wooster Group archivist, Clay Hapez, sent videos and images of her to Candace, as well as to the New York Times. I have been doing my own personal memorial, watching Rumstick Road again and again, and talking about her with Robinson, the scholar, and others who were changed by her work without ever having seen her in person. I've started finding mystic correspondences, too, like that warmly glowing tent, an image I associated with her for more than a dozen years before I would ever learn she spent the last months of her life in one. Almost nobody from Vermont knew that she had been an important actor and dancer, and no one from her New York days seemed to have been at her funeral. A few didn't know she had died until I reached out for a comment, though others posted tributes on her online obituary. The only character from her short, dazzling career that her friends could remember figuring in the intervening decades was Gray, whom Howes approached after he performed in Vermont. Afterward, Gray told LeCompte that they had a nice but short conversation, though Carol doesn't think it was a successful meeting. But then the other indelible image from Rumstick Road is not one of connection. Near the beginning of the show, Spaulding and Libby play a manic game of tag as a jazzy Nelson Riddle theme plays. They race like children across the set. Sometimes he is it, sometimes she is. Spaulding and Libby run through the doorways, slamming and opening doors, making only glancing contact, but clearly having a wonderful time. The film flickers and they fade, but that's how I remember them, chasing each other around and round forever. Crossing cultures. Performers share, learn, and create. A collaboration of master tap and kathak artists is part of What Flows Between Us, a festival of Indian music and dance by Brian Siebert. Some do it with metal, others do it barefoot and with bells on. But these dancers can communicate across those differences through music. In Speak, American tap dancers collaborate with their counterparts in kathak, a classical Indian percussive dance form. While these genres have been crossed before, rarely have the participants been such masters of their art. On the tap side are Michelle Dorrance, the only tap dancer to have won a MacArthur Grant, and Dormashaya, widely considered the world's greatest. Representing kathak are Rukhana Neves and Rukhamani Mehta, disciples of Chetrish Das, who was the foremost guru of kathak in the United States. He died in 2015. On February 21st, Speak is to have its New York premiere at 92 New York as the culmination of What Flows Between Us, a day-long festival of Indian music and dance curated by Nevis. In line with 92 NY's Women Move the World series, of which it is a part, all the leading artists are women. We wanted to show these art forms can speak to one another, Nevis said about the collaboration. Accordingly, Speak has two bands, a jazz trio and a group of classical Hindustani musicians. There are traditional solos in each idiom, but the Kathak dancers also jam with the jazz players, and the tap dancers trade rhythms with the tabla drummer. At the end, everyone joins the musical conversation. We're inviting each other into the audiences and the details of our forms and seeing where all these things connect, Dorrance said. It's not fusion, Nevis said. The deeper you go into your own form, the more equipped you are to have a really meaningful collaboration. It's because we have all gone so deeply into our forms and are rooted in an extremely disciplined practice that the meeting of us is like fireworks. In one sense, Speak is a demonstration of differences between Kathak and tap, where tap dancers have amplifying metal on the bottoms of their shoes. Kathak dancers drum the floor with bare feet. They wear bells around their ankles that mark accents like a shaker, but also resonate nearly continuously, almost like high-pitched drone. The collaboration has been a learning experience that both sides have had to approach with a beginner's mind. Dorrance described the insane but pleasurable challenge of jumping into a Kathak meter of 9.5 beats. Tap dancers usually work in 3s or 4s, maybe 5s. The Kathak footwork is so subtle and so fast as it moves between notes that it's hard to see what's happening, she said. Mehta recalled struggling to understand jazz grooves and marveling at the tap technique. There are so many things that Michelle and Dormisha can do with their feet that we can't, she said. Sometimes you have to translate, and sometimes you're like, maybe I can move that way. Teaching each other also has revealed much about their own forms. It's like a mirror, Nevis said. Nevis recalled watching Dormisha take a Kathak phrase and turn it into something else in tap. I'm like, I can do that now. I can bring it back to my own dance. Dorrance alluded to the tradition of improvisational exchange in tap, in which one dancer will copy or steal a move or rhythm from another dancer, then change it. This is called making it your own. Some of the exchange here is stealing it back, Dorrance said. She can take a tap step that has been transformed through the bodies and renditions of the Kathak dancers and incorporate it back into hers. We were teaching them the shim-sham, Dorrance said, and referring to a routine from the 1920s that almost all tap dancers know. She noticed that the Kathak dancers were shifting their weight in a manner derived from Indian technique. And I'm like, that's a great choice. Why don't I shift my weight that way? It makes sense in this rhythmic pocket, and I've lived in since I was 3-year-old. You have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the February 15th issue of the New York Times Arts and Leisure section. We read from the New York Times Arts and Leisure section every Sunday at 3 p.m. Your reader has been Barbara. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have... The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.